Hi guys, I'm Mike and this is F1 Fanatics. Welcome back to another F1 Worldwide the Fan podcast, and very happy to be welcoming on another special guest onto the podcast, and that is Jonty from Jonty's Corner, obviously a regular on the F1 Words with Sean. So Jonty, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks for having me on, Mike. This is another channel where my name keeps popping up. All I seem to do is talk for other people.
Well, it's very nice because on that basis, Jonty, you get to have all the fun of talking the stuff and then don't have to worry about the editing afterwards on that front.
If you see my editing skills, you understand that's a good thing.
I'm sure it is, but I know you are looking to actually get some stuff on your channel as well, so we will leave Jonty's channel in the description, a link to it in the description down below. But the reason I've got Jonty on today is because we are going to be talking about something that is very, very fun, I think, to talk about, because F1, it isn't all about the drivers. The drivers, we do talk about them, we kind of fascinate, they're the forefront of it, and you know, we love seeing them perform and what they do on track. But we're going to talk about the cars mainly today, and the kind of the teams and the technical innovations that they've come up with over the history of the sport, and we're going to talk through some of our favourites, and I'm sure more will pop up in the comments below of some of other people's favourites. But yeah, that's the topic. But the first one we're going to start off with is the 0025, and that is with the XWing. So, Jonty, do you want to get us started off on this one? Well, absolutely. Even a team as high up as Ferrari saw it as an advantage, and it was its main benefit, wasn't it, for these kind of high downforce tracks, and it was just like a Monaco and just planting as much downforce in the car, and it wasn't something out of Star Wars, but it was just funny with having that kind of X-Wing shape, and all the teams kind of came up with their own kind of quirky little innovations of these X-Wings as well, didn't it? A bit like kind of front wings, how they've developed in recent times.
Yeah, I mean, you had some where it was a very thin arm holding up the wing with an extra little buttress on it. Others, I think it was Ferrari, the arm that held up their wing was really, really big and chunky. It was almost like its own side shark fin. And very, very ugly. God. So I'm just remembering how ugly all of those cars were. Literally all of them. Was it around the same time Arrows even stuck one on the nose as well?
I think they did, actually. Yeah, no,
They had two pylons up from the side pods and an extra wing sticking up from above the suspension. Like, what are you doing? It's Formula 1 car, not a car, no.
I mean, I believe the most famous out of them who kind of turned it down was Adrian Newey and the McLarens, because I think Adrian Newey is a bit of a purist and not. Although he is a bit of a designer and wants things to look nice like an F1 car, and obviously that's where the kind of innovations of 2021, well now 2022, are coming in terms of they want. I believe Ross Brawn said he wanted an F1 car to look sexy again, and with the introduction of the X-Wing, it certainly wasn't. And I think it's probably one on this list that we are actually quite glad that got banned.
Absolutely.
And it was banned. You mentioned it at the start because of the safety aspect of it. I believe it was that interview with Eddie Jordan. He was saying, you know, it's a shame because we were one of the teams who were benefiting from it. But you know, if it's element of between something being safe or not, then you have to lean on the side of being safe. And it was, I believe, it was the sight. It was affecting the driver's sight because obviously, like you said, you had these kind of massive pylons on some cars, just obscuring the driver's vision. It was crazy, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they can see very little from the mirrors as it is. The last thing they need is extra bits of bodywork sticking up out of the side pods, getting in the way of it.
And in fairness, it would just be a distraction to your peripheral vision as well, I imagine. So is you might be trying to focus on something, but yeah, you kind of got this vision of this kind of tool stand in the corner of your eye, it'd be crazy, wouldn't it?
Yeah, especially when they wobbled. Some of them wobbled about quite a bit. The Ferrari one didn't because it was such a chunky mount for it, but the others tended to flap around quite a lot. And we saw how much things can flap around from the T-wings. They used to wobble so much. I'm still amazed that only a couple ever came off. But these X-wings were even bigger, chunkier pieces with an actual wing at the top. Tiny one, but it was still a wing. Not good for tyres.
No, they certainly won't. And I think that's probably a good point to round off first. I'll give it bonus points for the name because
Yeah, absolutely.
it had a great name, but that was about probably where the great stopped with the X-Wings. And I believe it was in 1998 with those outlines. And if you haven't seen those, obviously Google them on... yeah, you can go and Google them on Google Images, but also I'm pretty sure F1 TV is free at the moment. So go back and watch some of the old races. And I think Monaco '97 was the first race that Tyrrell introduced it. So yeah, go and have a look at some of those because they are bizarre to kind of see in a car. But we'll move on to the second one, and this will be one that I know a lot of people will be familiar with on it, and we'll go with the Fduct. Obviously, McLaren introduced in 2010. So, do you want to give your thoughts on that, Jonty?
The Fduct was genius. It was very, very clever, just using simple principles of physics to get a massive, massive boost. Unfortunately, it got spoiled by other teams who tried to adopt it, but in the most really cack-handed shed build ways you can think of. I mean, McLaren, who came up with it, their solution was quite neat. I think it was the driver's knee. All they had to do was lean it against the side of the cockpit. You know, his left leg, so his braking leg, whilst going down the straight, his left leg not doing anything at that point. It's perfectly fine and safe. And then we saw it was the Ferrari who gave the game away, wasn't it? They spoiled things.
Fernando Alonso, I can't remember the circuit he was at, but I remember Domenicali having to kind of defend it in the press, going, he's just a very good driver. It's like, well, he shouldn't really be going one-handed through a corner just to kind of maximise this Fduct on the straight. It certainly wasn't a great reflection, was it?
Yeah, because they had to sort of take their hand completely away from the steering wheel to cover the hole. You know, it was a really. It's not just like they tilted their elbow up or anything. It was completely remove the hand. And you could argue it's not that bad because, you know, as late as '92, we still had some cars with a gear stick. You know, and they were forever. They did half the lap one-handed because there were so many gear changes to be done. But by the same vein, they were so much slower. So it's not the biggest way to do things.
No, you kind of almost go, it was such a smart and clever intuition. Rather than banning it, maybe the banning of the hand use one. But then I suppose maybe they would be having that bit where McLaren would have to share some things and teams would have worked it out, and therefore
exactly.
back out, and then its kind of significance becomes null and void. But it was an incredibly, because it was as much as I think 6 k's per hour on the straight, wasn't it? That it was gaining an advantage.
Yeah, some places it was as much as 10.
Wow.
Which, you know, over a kilometre, which a lot of the straights were, that can be a big, big difference.
What? Just imagine backing now on modern things, and on the I imagine China was pretty significant on those back straights, and obviously when we get there, the Vietnam one has quite a long straight as well. Those sort of tracks, it would have been almost race defining.
Oh yeah, easily.
But it was that you'll go through on this list. There'll be some where you they're almost so obvious they're like slapping you in your face. These technical innovations, but mainly McLaren actually, because I think we'll stick with McLaren in the next one as well. I think they try to be a little bit clever and a little bit more subtle in the way that they did it. But I think that probably rounds off on the Fduct, Jonty, unless you have anything more to add to it.
No, it's one of those where I think it's a shame they got spoiled by others. It wasn't just Ferrari, I'm not bashing them. There were a couple of other teams, Sauber in particular, who had that driver taking a hand off. It's one with that could have stuck around for a while and been developed further if people had done it in a responsible manner. So it's a bit of a shame.
Yeah, it certainly is. There will be a lot of what ifs on this list, but it was certainly one of a what ifs that was like, that would be really interesting to see what the minds of Formula One could have come up with, because it was essentially just managing airflow to stall the rear wing, wasn't it? And exactly, that's how it benefited with the gains on the straights. And
could we argue it's still here, but this time it's just a flap?
Indeed, yeah. We could easily, that could have been the workaround. But we'll move on to the next one. And the next one debuted in 1997. I believe it was first taken out by Mika Hakkinen. And that is the extra brake pedal that was put into the McLaren car. And what are your thoughts on the third brake, Jonty? Well, the third pedal.
Again, genius. It's very clever. They used to have space for a third pedal because they needed a clutch. And so why not stick another one there, but it brakes the rear wheels. And it was designed in such a way where the foot could cover both or just one. It was very neatly done. I fail to see any problem with this. I honestly don't know why it was banned. It's a benefit, but it's a benefit which comes from driver skill. It's something the driver has to do himself. It's got nothing to do with the pits. It's got nothing to do with, what's going on in the strategy or any of the telemetry going back and forth between the car and the pit lane. It's just how good the driver is with his left foot. Where's the problem?
It is one of the most bizarre ones on this list to me that got banned, because it was so clever, and it was found out by a photographer, wasn't it? So the photographer had taken pictures, and he'd noticed on his pictures that the rear brakes, I think, on the McLaren were glowing, and he was like, that's unusual, that doesn't usually happen. And then I think he snuck a camera in and found out about this third pedal, and it'd been developed by a guy, but I think it was the word in how McLaren named it. I think they called it a brake steer, because obviously it was helping the tyres through, helping with it. But it wasn't a steering aid. But because they called it a brake steer, Ferrari then argued that it was affecting steering and therefore making it four-wheel drive, which obviously was banned. And then I think it was Ross Brawn who called it the fiddle brake. And obviously that was something used in another series, wasn't it? I can't remember the series that it was used in, but basically, that was obviously something that altered with the steering, and that's essentially why it got banned. But basically, Ferrari came up with all these excuses, saying it would be too expensive to reproduce, where I believe McLaren said they did it with like 50 quid of odd bits and bobs that were just hanging around anyway, that they built this thing. It really wasn't that expensive to do. But Ferrari were like, this is gaining them a massive advantage. With teams, what's easier to do? Get it banned so you don't have to spend money on it, or do it yourself and try and make it better. Yeah, I think it was Ron Dennis who said in his interview that Ferrari went for the kind of cheap option instead of rising to the challenge of taking this idea on. They just got it banned.
Yeah, and that's one of very few points that I will always agree with Ron Dennis on, is the thing we still see happening now. instead of thinking, wow, that's genius, we can work out how they do that and we can do it better. You just go, oh no, wrong, damn it. It's really, really annoying. You know, that's what happened with the blown diffusers, the double diffuser, although that did go the right way, thankfully, where they said, no, it's fine, do it yourself, was top. And you do have to think, if Red Bull had just gone ahead and developed it instead of whining for months and months, they'd have walked 2009 easily.
Absolutely. It is crazy to kind of think on it. It's frustrating because we were discussing this before we had our chat. One of the greatest appeals for Formula One is it's not just the driver, it's not just the guy in the car and on the pit wall. It's the whole team, the mechanics, the engineers who go to building this one machine, and then they obviously trust it in the hands of a guy that they think can go and win them races. And you know, you want to see this technical innovation, and this was an incredibly smart idea. I think the guy who created it said that he had a eureka moment on the Christmas holidays. He was in the bar because David Coulthard, it was initially built with him in mind, and because he was complaining about the car being too oversteery in the corners, and so obviously this would then help prevent that and make it easier. And the switch that they developed was ingenious. It was a simple flick of a left or right switch between which tyre would get the extra braking on. And it was just incredibly clever, and an incredible shame that it wasn't really allowed to develop.
Yeah, and I've got a feeling that'll be a running theme here.
I genuinely think it is. It is one of those where you go, why did you do that? But again, I suppose there isn't that limitless checkbook in Formula One. So I suppose there's that element of, we could let this slide, but this could quickly get things out of control. So we've got to try and keep some form of budget so we don't just have the rich teams at the front dominating. Although you could argue that's essentially what's happened in this current form of F1 pre-2022 rule changes.
Yeah, it's true.
Right. So we will move on to the fourth one, and it's the first of, there's a couple of Lotus renditions on here, and we're going to look at the Jewel Shetty. So what are your thoughts on the 1981 Jewel Shetty car that never saw the light of day, Jonty?
I'm still kind of struggling in some ways to get my head around the workings of it. In principle, it's very simple. And yet, in the actual practice of making it work, it seems ridiculously complicated. And I don't know why, which kind of impresses me. It makes me think this is really, really clever. It's a shame we didn't get to see it race to see how good it could have been. I think in essence, it was kind of the bodywork as opposed to chassis that was surrounding the safety cockpit, which wasn't directly working on the suspension mountings and everything. They were mounted inside, so it could move down to the floor, whilst the middle didn't.
Yeah, that was essentially my understanding of it. If there was a chassis that basically was, the monocoque, the safety element of it, the kind of whole steering column, and everything was there, and then another one which had like the aerodynamics basic on it, was controlling it. And obviously this was developed by Colin Chapman, and who, we'll move on to this, was the guy who mastered ground effect in Formula One, and was very upset that obviously ground effect was getting more and more controlled. So he'd saw what an advantage it did. And one of the other benefits of this was obviously it made the car longer. So it then essentially meant that the skirting boards to exploit ground effects were longer as well. So therefore, improving massively this. But I believe it was pre-Long Beach was the practice session that it was out, and then it was sadly, again, another one on this list of people going, rather than going, all see this, they were probably thinking, you know what, Collins thought of this. This is probably going to be bloody quick. Let's nip this in the bud before we have to worry about trying to create something like this.
This one, I do support the banning of on the safety standpoint. You probably already know I'm a very big advocate of safety in motorsport, and the idea of having a floating chassis separate to the main monocoque, that just rings alarm bells all over the place. If you have a major accident with that, you could have half the car flying off somewhere else. The driver could be off having his own accident, rolling in the main central monocoque, while the rest of the car is tumbling down the track. There's always that risk of them getting detached, because I haven't seen any details of how they were mounted together, but if it can move, it's not going to be that secure in an extreme circumstance. Well,
considering the fact that, we'll talk about it, but obviously in 82, ground effect was essentially outlawed until obviously we're going to see a return of it in the 2022 rules, which, is a very exciting prospect to kind of see how that's going to pan out and how the teams are going to cope with all modern technology and kind of bring back something that was essentially very dominant for the sport. It makes sense that at that time it did get banned because, like you said, the safety element of it, and it massively has to come into the fact it certainly wasn't going to be the safest of cars, but it probably would have been bloody quick if it kind of got
quick. It would have been the quickest by a mile. There's no doubt of that.
Yeah, which you go, oh, it would have been very interesting to see, but like you said, and especially around those times, obviously, of the older generators. I mean, that was pre the 82 season, where obviously we had some still devastating crashes and deaths in that season as well. So, yeah, it's one of those where you go, you're intrigued to see how it works, but you definitely feel, like you said, it was probably the right decision that it was banned in the end.
Yeah. Sometimes I wish that some of these things got banned could be utilised, and maybe just up the hill at Goodwood. Or maybe find a track where all these innovations can just see what they would have been capable of, pit them against some of the machinery of the time, because there's still plenty around. Just so we know, just so all of us nerds can know exactly how good it may or may not have been.
Yeah, although I suppose the only positive of it is we can have conversations like today and just how good it might have actually been, and go, it looked really weird as well. It almost looked like a space shuttle. I probably maybe is the best description of it. It kind of, it had just a very weird look to it. The way that the back curved, I think, from the images of it, it looked a little bit more futuristic than what was actually driving at the time.
Yeah, that's true. I think it always got me, the driver looked a lot more cocooned than in the other cars. The sides were a little bit higher. And it did look more protected, but only on that inner bit. And the rest of it seemed very bulky.
Yeah.
It was an odd car.
It was odd, but one kind of compiled to the history of what-ifs, which there are plenty in the realm of Formula One. But we'll move on to one of, you could probably argue a few of these, probably two in particular on this list that were championship defining. But we'll move on to the Double Diffuser that was obviously used by Braun. So what are your thoughts on the Double Diffuser, Jonty?
Well, it was just a classic of reading the rules the right way. Make sure you know exactly what every letter of those regulations and technical specifications says, to know exactly where you can and can't put stuff and how big you can or can't make things. That's exactly where the teamings came from. they get their list of specifications of exactly how big and where things can be, and then 3D, the CAD guys, they go and draw up, a model, a very basic 3D model of, right, this highlights everywhere we can put stuff and how big things can be, and then they work to it. It was an oversight that led to the T-Wing, and it was an oversight that led to the Double Diffuser. They saw, we can, if we say this is for the rear crash structure and various other bits, then we can make this part of the diffuser higher. So there's it's all very complicated, and I always forget half of it. It's seemingly simple, but the way they actually had to make it work and had to get around the rules was quite complex. But it was genius, and that's the kind of innovation that should be allowed to stand. And thankfully, it did for a year at least.
Yeah. It was a shame that after the year that it got banned, but you kind of feel like by that stage Red Bull had developed it, and that they probably still would have dominated with that as well. But it was just the fact that, well, obviously, so many of these things is about manipulating airflow and trying to kind of improve the downforce generated on the car, or at least a way that you can manage it better, and so you can kind of get gains in these areas. And just finding a way so they could create that larger hole, which meant that airflow kind of escaped quicker. And it was, a championship defining innovation. And like you said earlier in the video, if Red Bull had actually kind of stopped, moping around and complaining whether to get it banned, because I think it was up until, because at the start of the season it got cleared, and then they went for it again later on in the season, didn't they? Around about April time, and I think, was it finally by the summer it was officially kind of 100% completely clear, and then obviously by the second half of the season it was storm ahead, and Red Bull actually themselves had a much better second half of that season, didn't they?
Oh yeah, miles better. The Brawn was really struggling for the last half of the year. It's one of the reasons why it annoys me when some people say, Button's not a real champion, because it was all the car at the start of the year. Because when you get to Brazil at the end, his drive to get those points to secure the title was incredible. It was a true, proper champion's drive. But there is something to it. But he had the car at the start, and he made the most of it, like all champions do.
Yeah, I mean, I had Cranky Yankee on. It will be the F1 Worldwide episode before this comes out, and we were talking about the 6 one-time world champions between 1990 and present day. And we were saying you almost feel like you have to defend some people at times, but you never get handed a world championship in Formula One. You have to drive the car and you have to earn the championship. And although they had a technical innovation that did dominate, he still had a teammate in Rubens Barrichello that he had to be. And then obviously that second half of the season, the Red Bulls came on very strong. And that drive in Brazil, was a championship defining drive. And it was still, fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think any of the champions can have anything taken away from them, because not only have they got to put the drives in when they've got the best car, they've got to have the skills to end up in the best car.
Absolutely.
Maybe apart from Jack, because we don't like
him. No, but that was a funny one. I'll quickly say it. But, I think it's mainly his, reputation proceeding after that. But you look at Jacques up until 1997, winning an IndyCar championship, winning the Indy 500, having the best rookie season in F1 up until that day, and then winning the world championship in his second season. You can't say the guy was a lack of talent from that point. But I know what you mean. From stuff that he's done in recent times, you go, what are you doing? Yeah. Is the polite way of putting it, probably, from there. But we'll move on to another one of probably one of the famous ones when people think of it, and if they were paying attention to Grosjean at Japan last year when they had their day off to the what was it, typhoon? It is. I always lose track. It's hurricanes, isn't it? The kind of Atlantic Ocean, Pacific. It's typhoons. But yes, the Tyrrell six-wheeler is basically what we're getting at, and well, I suppose we'll talk about the 90. Well, it was between 1976 and 78, I think it raced for Tyrrell. But I'm putting you on the spot there. I'm pretty sure I had that up. It was 77 where it was most prominent.
Yeah,
definitely.
First round in 76.
With Jackie, I think I remember the story. The engineer recalls the story of when he first told Jackie, he spat.
Jody.
Oh yeah, Jody. But yeah, when he first kind of spat his drink out and going, well, what do you mean you're going to put another set of wheels on? And it was Goodyear running the tyres at that time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So they had to go to Goodyear and get these specifically made tyres for their car, which they were more than happy to. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the Tyrrell six-wheeler?
Well, just another way of simple but clever way of getting around the whole problem of driving. The only reason they were the extra grip and four tyres at the front was just a benefit. The main aim was to get smaller wheels, so there wasn't a great big wheel causing drag on the car down the straight. It's one of those where it is a really simple thing, but it's not something that anyone would logically think of. You know, you probably think of, can we make the wheels smaller somehow? Well, you wouldn't think, let's make 4 small wheels instead of 2. That's really, really outside the box thinking.
Yeah, and we spoke about this when we were on a chat pre-recording in terms of that. During this time, the innovations and obviously it's become harder with the way that the rules have become more restricted over time. But you would get some very weird and wonderful cars. Weird is certainly a way to kind of describe the Tyrrell. With obviously, it looks weird to see a Formula 1 car with 6 whips, but at the same time, it's brilliant as well.
Yeah, it makes it kind of look a bit comical.
Yeah.
Because the rear wheel's still the same size, and the helmet's still the same size, and the wings are still the same size. It makes you look a bit like, what am I actually looking at? Is that right? But there have been other six-wheelers that were far, far weirder.
Yeah, there certainly have. And obviously, we talk about Tyrrell because they were the ones that, mainly ran this and introduced this. And they retired it themselves because, obviously, Goodyear were developing the tyres for the normal cars, but obviously they weren't really investing in their, I think it was 10-inch rims.
Yeah.
For these ones, they obviously weren't developing those, so therefore the tyre degradation on it just made the fact that, although its benefit was great, they were then losing the benefit because the tyres weren't holding up as opposed to the other teams. Not 4 tyres, yeah.
Yeah, they would have to stop more often, and then you have to think the stop's going to take longer because of an extra pair.
Exactly. So all that benefit they then gained, unfortunately, they then lost, and so obviously decided to retire the idea. But one kind of rounding off on the six-wheelers, which would have been interesting, was the Williams one that never saw the light of day because it essentially utilised ground effect in a larger way by extending the length of the car, so then extending the kind of skirting boards. 4-wheel drive got banned, but that would have been, I believe, the 4 tyres were at the back and they were all the same size. Am I correct?
Yeah, they were the same size as the front. All 6 wheels were the same size. which meant they had the skirts of the ground effect running from right at the front of the chassis all the way to behind the rear wheels. You know, where the axles just poked through holes in the skirt. So the entire length of the car, which was already longer, was providing that ground effect, and it would have been massive.
You just think it would have been absolutely huge, and again, a bit like the double chassis car in 1981. It's not a matter of would that have been quick. It's that would have been very quick. How quick would it have actually been to kind of? I mean, you know, if it didn't get outlawed, essentially we then looking at the next 10, 20 years of F1 with all 6-wheel cars. You just don't know. It would have been bizarre to kind of think of it.
Yeah, who knows where it could have gone. Although it's interesting that Tyrrell were the only ones who did 4 wheels at the front. Williams did 4 at the back, March did 4 at the back, and Ferrari tried one out, which was interesting. March did the same thing as Williams. Ferrari stuck an extra pair of wheels on the same axle.
I mean, Ferrari don't really feature on this list. They do get an honourable mention. It's because Ferrari build a brilliant engine and what they do, and they have a great way of building a car. In terms of technical innovations, in terms of in Formula One, they're not ones that are genuinely blessed with it. I think they are ones who utilise what others do, and are very good at building a quick car within the rules. But in terms of thinking outside the box, it certainly was a little bit weird, and we'll come on to that one a little bit later on in the video. But that probably rounds off the Tyrrell 6-wheeler, and if anything, it's an icon because like you said, it almost looks like something out of Wacky Race in terms of just those kind of 2 smaller wheels at the front with the same size at the back. It is bizarre, but it was a brilliant innovation that would have been interesting to see how far it would have gone, actually.
Yeah, very much so. I'm just looking at pictures of it now, and it's just brilliant. Oh, and one thing I mentioned when we were chatting before, one thing on Joey's car, he complained that he couldn't see what the tyres were doing because the wheels are so small. So you can actually see on some pictures they cut in a little perspex window so you can look past his knee and see what the wheels are doing. Very simple solution to a tricky problem.
Which it is bizarre, isn't it? That they do make the obviously simple in F1. Just they come up with it, and you go, you know what? That is such a why didn't we think of that?
Yeah,
literally idea, and you do have that kind of light bulb moment of, okay, that's how you do it. Okay, yeah, that's good. So it is ingenious thing. So we'll move on to the next one, and that is a very interesting one because it would have been fascinating to see if it ran the full championship. And that is the Brabham fan car. And so what are your thoughts on the fan car, Jonty?
Well, that's another case of being a very, very clever way to get around the rules. Or to get around the wording of the rules. You know, it was at the peak of ground effect, obviously, and they just read it as, we can't have fans that actively do it, but we can have fans to call the car. How about we just put the radiators in the way? That's literally all they've done. And it's genius. Even if it does look a little bit weird.
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of feel like it's one of those kind of fan boats that kind of skid across. That's where you kind of bit a hovercraft. That's what the kind of fan almost looks like planted on the back of an F1 car. But I think it was genius in the fact that you couldn't have something affecting the underground, the ground effect by more than 50%, wasn't it? And it was because they got the heating above that. I believe it was like 55% of the use of the fan that they were like, yeah, that's all good. And this is actually one of those on the list that were actually completely legal. And this innovation was completely safe. It was completely fine, and I believe one of the kind of complaints of it was for throwing rocks, and they put an old dustbin lid on the back of it as well to kind of crowd off and stop that argument. But it was removed because Colin Chapman wasn't happy about it. Bernie Ecclestone was trying to build a little bit of a powerhouse in F1 at the time, and basically they said that they wouldn't join his constructor league if they continued to race this Brabham fan car, even though it had been found completely legal. And Bernie, looking at the bigger picture of things, decided to withdraw it. And I think it's one of those cars that once it got going, that it probably would have gone on to, win the championship had it raced the full season.
I'm fairly certain if it had carried on, it would have dominated. It's fairly safe to say that because it's such a massive, massive advantage. But like I say, it was withdrawn due to pressure from other drivers. And as you said before, going on, there's stories of Mario being told to go around and tell other drivers to complain about it, spitting rocks and bits of rubber at them. And as I mentioned before, it's not entirely unreasonable to voices of concern. Helmut Marko was buying in one eye by stuff getting kicked up from the track. It's it's not beyond the realms of possibility, but yeah, it was a bit of a hack job, I think, by Chapman and the rest of the grid, just because this upstart guy came up with a clever idea and it's going to take everything.
Yeah, I think it was probably... There are a few examples, probably the McLaren brake pedal as well on this, but it was a few examples of F1 politics in full flow. There is with F1, there's never an easy answer, and there's never quite as simple as, that's clever, we'll do that. There's so many things that kind of go on behind the scenes and background, and obviously Colin at the time was a very dominant force within F1, and people were very inclined to support and back him. So if he didn't like it, it kind of got withdrawn from the championship, and it's one of those ones that it's still an iconic car, but it's certainly one that we would look back on today and go, iconic championship winning cars. The Brabham fan car. It would be one that people would go and go, wow, that was crazy. That won a championship. But yeah.
I've never liked it, to be honest. I've liked the innovation, but I hate the way the rear engine cover looks because it was flat 12. And there isn't the traditional hump that we see even then and now. It was just a really wide, low, flat deck, and it just looks absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, with the things with engineering, sometimes if you make things go quick, it doesn't look pretty. And it was certainly it was certainly a really odd look. It, again, a bit like some of these other ones on the list, it kind of made it a little bit look futuristic in terms of it didn't really look right on the grids. But around this time, like we keep saying, there were a lot of kind of innovations on cars that looked very strange, and cars certainly differed in the way that they looked a lot more than they do on today's grid.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true. You could tell the difference between some of them instantly.
So we'll now move on to an innovation which is quite a funny one, because it's quite obvious in the thing, but obviously starting where F1 cars were is actual front wings and rear wings themselves. And obviously there were lots of play arounds with rear wing for, I think, the combination, but I think it is noted that in 1968 with Brabham, Ferrari and Lotus, they were the ones to kind of experiment with some form of the rear wings and front wings, and I think it was Graham Hill's Lotus 49B that was the first kind of standout with that. So what are your thoughts on well, obviously this innovation has defined the sport. Would you agree, Jonty?
That's a fairly safe thing to say. the introduction of aero completely changed the game. And it didn't start in F1. It really did completely change the landscape. The first car that came in with aero that didn't fall off was utterly dominant. I can't think of the first F1 car that actually got used to it. I only remember beforehand. But we saw it, and they were trying all sorts of crazy things. Just trying to learn and understand about this new witchcraft using the air. I mean, to begin with, at the start, they just had a basic understanding of drag. That was about it. Just stick the biggest engine in you can and round off the front of it. That was it. And then as soon as someone discovered aero, it was just time started to tumble and signs started to get weird.
Yeah, and it is the start, and we've seen many of weird innovations, and sometimes the front wings, even as late as the 80s, were kind of rendered useless. I remember watching back one of our classic race reviews recently. We watched the 82 Long Beach one, and obviously Lauder's winning McLaren in that had no front wing whatsoever. And Patrese in the Brabham, I think it was, lost half a front wing, like fairly early in the race, but was able to carry on. So over time it kind of developed, but I'll probably say from 1988 with the MP44 and how dominant that was, that's probably most dominant front and rear wing and asserted itself for the longevity to come. Probably a fair shout.
Yeah, I mean, during that period you mentioned, sort of 82, at the end of the ground effect period, it was weird because aero using the wings had come in and they learned more and more about it through the 60s.
Yeah.
Well, the end of the 60s and through the 70s. But then when the ground effect came in, they started drifting away from those wings again. Because you just got so much more from the ground effect. That's why Nicky didn't have one in that race. And if you look at some other cars, I mean, the Arrows A2, the famous gold one, sponsored by Warsteiner, the entire car is the wing designed around getting that ground effect. So he didn't have the spindly bit stuck out. When that got banned, the wings came back and they tried a lot of crazy stuff. Which was the one you were mentioning? Is that the referencing here with the double wing?
Yeah, that is. So obviously the rear wing's length was kind of specified by the FIA, within rules and specifications. So Ferrari looked at that and they decided, well, the rules state that one rear wing can be that length. So what about the fact if you had two wings of that length? So they then had two wings of the maximum length that they could do, pieced them together and shoved them on the back. Looked incredibly unstable on the back, and I'm not entirely sure what the benefit of it was, because for it being so unstable, and actually stability is one of the ones we'll move on to, one of our technical innovations that's a little bit more clever coming up. But yeah, obviously they got disqualified post-race for it, and it never kind of carried on because it was a essentially stupid idea.
Yeah, I mean, you can understand the thinking behind it. That's where so many of these innovations come from. The fact that, right, well, the rules do say this, but they don't say this. But the rules say the rear wing can be no bigger than this, but it doesn't say we can't have two. So we'll just have two. I mean, I don't honestly understand the thinking behind this particular innovation, because the way they were mounted, instead of usually being mounted with the pylon in the middle for that particular car, it was right on the end. So you're going to lose so much of the benefit of the downforce by the wing bending. And most of the stuff at that time was aluminium, which work hard a lot. So it would have bent down, stayed there, and after a bit more time, all it does is increase the risk of it snapping.
And it did literally, looking back at that race, and I advise people you can watch it on YouTube, even if you just watch clips of it, of this car. Like it was flapping around, and I remember one instance Gilles Gilles just flew around anyway. He always pushed a car to the limit, but yeah, he just kind of flew off, spinning around one corner, and just carried on the race. But he only finished in third in that race, and Nicky absolutely dominated it. So it didn't. It's one that was introduced, but I don't know how long, if it didn't get banned, it would have continued to hang around anyway, because it didn't appear to gain any sort of mass advantage.
No, I don't think there was any advantage really.
No,
I really don't. I think it was actually a detriment. Genuinely, the idea, just words on paper, makes sense. Well, it doesn't say we can't have. It says one has to be this big, but it doesn't say we can't have two. So we've got two. That's more. But the reality of it just doesn't work. Although the idea did stay around for a while, there have been other variations on having an extra rear wing. I think around about 92, 93, particularly around places like Monaco, you would see the rear wing would have arms extending out forwards over the engine cover with another extra wing on there. So the idea stuck around, but it was implemented in much cleaner ways.
Yeah, I mean that is certainly something that happens. Sometimes, people have the idea and then it gets built on and improved by people. But that was one that essentially everyone's kind of come to the realization that front wings and rear wings, they've been a major part of the sport, other than that period of ground effect, which we'll come on to after this last one. We'll finish off with ground effect, because I think it's the most poignant in terms of the link looking forward to the sport. But yeah, we'll finish off with a mass damper and give an honourable mention, I think, to the DAT system as well. But yeah, the mass damper used by Renault, first introduced in 2005, and then obviously everyone started to pick up on the use of it in 2006, and eventually was outlawed, I think, in the summer of the 2006 season. What are your thoughts on this? We had a good chat pre-recording this one.
Yeah, because this is proper, what I would call proper engineering solutions. Looking at problem, seeing if there are any other relatable problems elsewhere in the world that have already got solutions in place that can be modified. And this, as I said before we started, I don't know if it came directly from civil engineering and building works, but that's one of the main places where a mass damper is used, particularly in very tall buildings, to counteract wind, earthquakes, and the like. The most famous one, I think, is the Taipei 101 in Taiwan. It was the second tallest building in the world for ages, and I think it might still be actually, with a massive, hundreds of tons metal ball hanging at the top of the building that just moves counter to the way of the building when it's buffeted by wind or ground movements. They've just shrunk that down, stuck it in the car to make it move side to side, backwards and forwards, to counteract the body roll of the car. And it also keeps things more stable, because all of the tyres and all of the suspension can be doing all of their work at the same time and controlling the central of gravity. It covers a lot of bases, and it's pure genius. Yeah,
and it massively improved time, and this is one that teams thought of, and they actually were like, God, we've got to copy this because it makes a massive difference. And I'll leave a link to the video. Actually, Formula One did kind of best 10 innovations of Formula One, and this is obviously included on there. And you just see the difference. They used the comparison of the Ferrari and Renault. I wasn't sure if it was the 05 Renault and Ferrari or the 06 ones. But basically, you can see the destabilization of the front wing on the Ferrari, and obviously that massively affects the aero and how it's going to be. And then use the example of a Renault not on track, but it had gone wide and off a corner with Alonso, and was basically, just kind of staying level playing, and just an incredible, keeping the aero and the gaining of time on it was massive, and incredibly, like you said, a proper engineering innovation that was just like, we need to kind of find a way of stabilizing the front of the car. Oh, well, someone's used this. Oh, actually, that'll really work. Why not that? And it was brilliant. And it seems that one seems a shame it was banned as well, actually, because it was very clever. I wasn't sure, actually, on the premises that they did ban it, but it was an interesting one.
I'm sure it got banned on the basis that it's a movable device.
That would be it then. They argue it wasn't.
But it is a shame, because with all of the suspension and the aero, the aim of the game is just keep a flat car as flat as possible when cornering. Because any roll in the car, the aero changes, the centre of gravity changes, and you lose time, which means tyres lose grip, you lose time. And this was thinking through it in my head now. This is almost like a passive way of doing the active suspension from the FW15 back in 92, 93.
I think it was 91, 92, 93, wasn't it? 92 and 3, they both dominated with it, and then it got banned, and that was obviously what Senna struggled with in 94 because the car didn't handle great.
FW13 great. Obviously it's nothing like as extreme as the active suspension was, but it's a similar idea, because as that weight moves, it shifts the centre of gravity, so the car can stay flat with the suspension. In certain places, have to do less work to try and prevent the roll. It's a very clever and relatively simple solution that uses very good, clever engineering. An easy solution with a complex problem with an easy solution, but it's still very clever and intricate in the way you have to do it. There's multi-levels to it, and I love that.
Yeah, and it's one of those ones on the list. Obviously, we've had glaring, like a big fat fan slapped on the back of a car, where you can obviously see that's something there. But obviously, this was something hidden beneath the front nose of the car, and it's the same as like the double diffuser. They're very kind of subtle, but the gains that they gain, they're very subtle in terms of what they do, and to the naked eye, you don't necessarily see a difference, which is they're often the best ones that you don't necessarily see, because you can still have a quite nice looking F1 car and you're still getting a massive gain in time. But it was a smart one, and it was a really good engineering solution to a problem that faced F1 cars. We will move on to our honourable mention before we round off with probably the most relevant point in ground effect, and that will be the DAT system. Obviously, Jonty, you were live on stream with Sean when this was noted. I think it was noted by Mark Priestley on Twitter, and everyone had a little bit of a mini meltdown getting excited about a new innovation, because Mercedes had found this little thing where they pull their steering wheel towards them, and suddenly we've got a brilliant fact that it, the main reason they said was for cooling tyres, but essentially there had to be some aero and performance gain from it. So what are your thoughts on it?
One of the main reasons I hope we get going this year. It really is, because I want to know what difference it would make. I really need to know. I hate the idea that there's a chance we could be into the period where it's banned before it ever gets used. Because it would be a real shame. There's so many things we've seen in the past that we've already mentioned that were clever innovations, but we've never got to see them right. This has got little in the way of safety. I've seen some arguments on the safety side, and me as well. Putting the steering wheel out while driving. There could be some distraction there, or effect, but it's negligible. There's no real reason for this to get banned. It's a bit unfair. I mean, it will be very unfair to fans who want to see what it can do if we get to that point where it's never used in anger.
Yeah, I think the shame with it is that with the stipulations of the then 2021 rules that will now be in place in 2022, I believe due to the regulations within that, it was something that wouldn't have been allowed there. But yeah, for these last section of the rules, and well, technically we should hopefully get to see it in 20. Well, no, it was banned. It's banned in 2021, regardless, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it is a real shame because, like you said, it was so smart. It was something so simple, and so it would be really interesting to see just how much of a difference it did. And of course, Mercedes were always going to play down the fact that it's only a little difference, but it would be fascinating to kind of see how much it would have made a difference in the championship and just in general.
Yeah, so I mean, there was so much discussion about that for like 2 weeks. Everyone, including us and myself, and practically every channel, were talking about it. They're just trying to decide what the best benefit from it was going to be. Because you got the aero side, you got the tire. When the wheels pull straight, there's no toe angle. Obviously, that's going to be small, but there will be an aero benefit. And when they can tow it out more, you've got on the straights they can heat the tyres better, ready for the corner. And I think when we were talking about it before, you mentioned Baku could really see a big gain from this, but we could see that gain from both sides. You've got a 2 kilometre straight, keeping the wheels dead straight with no toe. That's got to be worth a few kph.
Mm.
But then before the braking zone, you can give the wheel a yank, tow the tyres out, heat them up, and then in the braking zone, into turn 1, he's got better grip than anyone else he might be fighting. Or in qualifying, predominantly, it's probably going to be the most obvious use of this. He can, particularly at Baku, he can do that for almost every corner.
Mm.
Certainly in the first sector, because it's straight, 90, straight, 90, straight, 90. So it's just aero benefit, heat tyres, corner benefit. Because like 5 corners in a row, that should give about a quarter of a second, in theory.
Yeah, absolutely. It just seems qualifying where tyre temperature and having them in the optimum window to maximise the time, as well as obviously drivers nailing their racing lines as well. I think it would have been fascinating because obviously that was the advantage where Mercedes lost out last year. It was Ferraris who, and Charles Leclerc or Charles Lepole, however you want to refer to him as. But he had taken away from something that Lewis had dominated for so long, which was qualifying. And obviously Lewis still had some fantastic qualifying performance in there, and Valtteri as well. But it certainly felt like a way that would have increased their percentage of getting pole positions, or at least on the front row.
And something that actually just popped into my mind on this one, on DAS. Because most people agree, however small, there would be some straight line aero benefit.
Mm.
That means they've got 2 laps of free, albeit very small, DRS.
Yeah.
That literally only just occurred to me in my head, because I was thinking if we could ever get a situation where you've got a Mercedes at something else, maybe a Ferrari or Red Bull side by side, we get an onboard, they yank the steering wheel and start to pull ahead, that would be clear, showing that there's an aero benefit. And I was thinking in my mind that, the start of Belgium, is always a good idea for that, because you've got the source, a rouge, Radion, and then the big long kennel straight where everyone's still really close together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've honestly had that. I haven't put those 2 points together. They get 2 laps of very small DRS for free.
It would be an incredible, and often, you know, in races it's position and holding position, and if you can hold up a car behind you or maintain your position ahead, it is the small differences that make a difference in the race. So it essentially could have been, I mean, it's a brilliant innovation anyway. Just the idea itself is fantastic, but to see it put into practice and how it would have played out, it would have also been an incredible thing, I think, to witness as well. But we never know. It might not have been as good as what we're doing it, but everything that Mercedes have done, well, probably since their introduction into the sport, in terms of how they laid the foundations for 2014 and the dominance that has followed then, has been brilliant. So you kind of feel like an idea that they come up with, it generally is probably going to do pretty well.
Yeah, they don't put anything on unless it's genuinely worth doing. I do think it's slightly unfair that if there were to be no racing this year, that they wouldn't be able to use it next year, because it was outlawed in the wording of the new regulations, but we already know that 2021 will not be using the new regulations. Surely that should be pushed back to 2022 as well.
Essentially what they're doing on this, I believe, is the pricing thing, and obviously this is the argument being laid out by a lot of teams. I have no idea how much it would cost to develop a DAT system, but essentially Formula One taking it out of people's hands and saying you're not going to have to develop one, because essentially if it was allowed in 2021, every team would have to develop their own version of it. If it received a benefit of it. Certainly the Ferraris and Red Bulls, you could argue that maybe essentially they have the money to play around with to develop such a system anyway. But I feel that's the argument that they'd put forward. For me, I'm with you. I feel, you know, it's within these set of rules, it's not breaking anything and it was allowed. But I can essentially see where in a time where we're all talking about cutting the budget cap's obviously introduced for next year, and talks about restricting that further. And at the time of recording, all the Ferrari again having rumours of, we're going to walk away from the sport. No, you're not. Joe, God, you've been here.
It's been a while, but it's been a while since Ferrari did a quit threat, to be fair. The last decade or so, you know, it's been mainly, well, not decade, but the last 7 or 8 years, it's been Red Bull and Mercedes who've been at the forefront of that. But no, it's back to Ferrari again. Every single time. I mean, the die-hard plans of Ferrari, they constantly go on about they're the only ones that have been there since the start. And I love pointing out the fact that Ferrari weren't in the first race because they refused to race because they were complaining about money. Race 1, 1950, May the 13th. Has anything changed? No.
It certainly is the case. Oh God, it is. But we shall move on to our last innovation to kind of round this off. And the reason we left it last is because it is the most relevant. Because with it is still exciting, these rule changes in 2022, because it's always exciting to see what the great minds who work in Formula One can come up with. But it is a concept which is ground effect. That was around before, but mastered really by Colin Chapman, especially in the 1978 season. And, you know, that Lotus really were the kind of leaders at the forefront of this until it was eventually outlawed in 82. So your thoughts on ground effect on, well, first, obviously its use in particular the 78 season, and also its future implications.
My favourite thing about ground effect is the fact it was discovered by accident. So many great things throughout science, some in engineering, that have been discovered by accident. And it's always so much more interesting because of that. I mean, the whole reason ground effect was discovered is because the models they were using in the wind tunnel were fairly slapdash, you can imagine, in the early mid-70s. And just over the constant use for hours and hours and hours, the way the models were put together, it began to sag. And bend a bit because they were put together with simple things. And to their main, I'm sure it was because they only had a set amount of time to use a wind tunnel. It wasn't their own wind tunnel, I'm sure it was a university that they were borrowing. So they were just cramming in all the hours they could to try and learn as much as possible. And the model began to sag. And as it got closer to the table, to sitting on the floor, all of a sudden the numbers were going up and up and up, which is just awesome. Absolutely fantastic stuff to see. It's great when things are discovered by accident, but of course it does lead to the extra problem of what have we discovered? How can we use this? And they had to reverse engineer a bit to understand what was going on. But as soon as they realised that, they just found 2, maybe more seconds a lap free, which is insane.
It's incredible, and the concept of it is obviously that for years and years they'd been kind of worrying about since the discovery of since we spoke about aerodynamics being more used, they were always worried about the airflow over the top of the car, and that's obviously for most kind of F1 fans. If you've kind of been a fan of F1 since 1982, that's what your life of F1 is, of aerodynamics. It's the front and rear wings. It's all the kind of, in recent years, the winglets that have been put on cars, obviously the barge boards that come into play, manipulating air, creating vortexes and everything that goes along it. The beauty of ground effect is that you had everything on top of the car, which could practically stay the same. And like we already mentioned, the rear and front wing technology almost kind of got neglected because they were like, well, we're getting so much time from sorting it in the grooves underneath the car and sucking the car and creating more downforce that way, that it was just incredible to see. And it's amazing that it was stumbled by accident. That is probably one of the greatest innovations. Well, I suppose it's not innovations in a way, because it is just viewing things in a different way, isn't it? Instead of viewing things on top of the car, it's viewing things underneath the car and going, wow, this is incredible how we can get time from this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly basic scientific principles. Bernoulli's principle. Volume of a fluid as it gets constricted and goes faster, the pressure goes down. It's quite, it's a very simple thing. It's been around for centuries.
Yeah.
But once they understood what was going on, they could just shape the car to suit that. So instead of being completely flat or whatever the underneath was, it was done like an inverted wing. A literal inverted airplane wing, sealing the sides with the skirts. That was, I think, the biggest element to it. And they went through all sorts of different things to try and seal that side. They had, at one stage, they had sort of slats of wood that would be scraping along, but that would wear it out. They tried brushes, but they would wear out. Brushes just like the draft excluder you see on some doors. Eventually, I'm sure I think it was nylon that they came up with, sprung nylon, so it would keep pressed against the floor no matter what happened. They got, they found out what was going on, and then all of the other little innovations that came to maximise it. That's the really clever bit.
It was such a great idea, but with a few of those great ideas, and obviously that time, these cars would take off, essentially, and that's essentially what got out was. And basically the technology at the time wasn't advanced enough to be able to find a solution to this. We are now obviously 40 years on, essentially, which it will be exactly 40 years, won't it, when it finally comes into play? Because it was 82 without boards and so 22 reintroduction. So that's that's quite a funny way of roundabout things. So 40 years, things have changed a bit. So we can imagine that, just the way it's going to be fascinating. Obviously, we were talking about this before. With any of these things, yes, the cars will be to begin with, but as we begin to understand the technology, it's going to be brilliant to kind of see how quick and how good these cars can become.
Yeah, I mean, you might say it was on the safety grounds that it got banned because it was relying so much on that seal from the skirts. As soon as that was broken, it becomes a wing. As soon as the mass air gets underneath instead of the focused channel there, it would just head off into the sky, as partly led to the death of Villeneuve, sadly, as his car just tried to go into orbit, and sadly he was in a very, very compromised mood and didn't fasten his safety belts correctly. He was thrown out. But I think now the thing is, one, they're not having the skirts and things to seal the side. They're using Venturi tunnels built into the floor. About this, I'm not sure what direction they're going to take. But I think the main thing is that safety construction of the cars has come so long that an airborne crash like that now is not a worry. To me, the way my mind thinks, it's not a problem.
Well, the best example of that is Peroni in F3 last year at Monza.
Oh, Jesus. Well, there's one driver life saved by the halo. Because that car came down, upside down perfectly on barriers. No halo, he's dead, no question. Absolutely no question. But no, the one I refer to is Ericsson, 2018. Was it practice or quality? I think it was just during practice when Ericsson's DRS stuff opened at Monza. A lot of I saw so much and had so many questions from newer fans about how massive that. I mean, that's the biggest crash we've seen in F1 for a long time, probably since Alonso's Australia crash.
Yeah,
and it's certainly the most dramatic. Alonso's was massive and looked very dramatic, but not in the same way as Ericsson's. It rolled over and over for so long. At no point was I ever concerned for his safety, ever. That is exactly, if you're going to have a crash in incredibly high speed in an open wheel racer, you want it to be exactly like Ericsson's, because it's safe. The car's being completely destroyed, but the driver is safe. Every time it hits the floor and rolls over, all the energy is being dissipated all over the place. Instead of going smack into a wall, all of that energy is being exerted on the driver's internal organs and neck and brain at the same time. That's the problem. And I think the safety is so good now that even if we did get situations like the unfortunate one for Villeneuve, the drivers would be totally safe. Even more so with things like the halo, the higher sides. I mean, you compare an 82 car to a 2019 or 2020 car. As far as the safety goes, it's completely unrecognisable. Compared to a 1982 F1 car, it is safer in a Fiesta today. You know what I mean? Even at those speeds.
It's light years ahead, isn't it? And that's the real reason that coming back. It's something that was halted correctly for kind of safety grounds and are there, but now we're in a position where we want to try and change things, make things more of a level playing field. Well, what's the best way to make things a level playing field? By reintroducing the main part of downforce technology. I mean, they'll obviously have had ideas a bit over the past and understanding and technology there, but something that's essentially been outlawed for 40 years, the understandings, it's going to be on a fairly level playing field, I would say. So therefore, maybe the hope is that obviously understanding would help level out the playing field across the grid as well.
Yeah, well, that's just it. Pretty much everyone's going into this blind. They've never used this technology. Perhaps at a very, very, very long stretch, McLaren might have the tiniest little advantage because they've still got some guys at the factory who were around when Bruce was. So they've got guys who were around during the ground effect period. How much they know, what they did at the time, I don't know. It's pure speculation and conjecture, but there was some guys around. But ultimately, everyone's going into this with the exact same knowledge of how it affects their cars. Zero.
Yeah, which is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it really is. It's perfect. And my only concern is I haven't been able to find any details of the actual technical regulation. There's the ones that you can find online and download from the FIA, and it covers things in letters, but the actual proper detailed stuff of sizes, dimensions, and all the rest of it, I can't find them anywhere because I want to know how they are regulating the Venturi times, the whole ground effect. Is it their positioning, inboard, outboard, how far forward or back they can be? Are they regulating the size dimensionally, or are they doing it by cross-sectional area? Are they really regulating where they can go underneath the car? Do they just have to be dead straight things? Are they going to have any bends in them? Do they have to avoid certain areas? I've seen none of these details, and I'm worried that they will either regulate them so tightly that it's just everyone gets this amount of downforce because they're there, instead of there being any kind of variation, or they haven't done it tightly enough, and you have some people coming up with completely crazy ideas that work, and others that come up with what they think is a good idea and it doesn't, and we get an even bigger split. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's the fear with any technical regulations. You have the idea of making rules and changes essentially to stop the team winning who are dominating. So I think, in fairness, F1 view it as long as they can stop Mercedes dominating, it's a win. Because I think everyone's just got to that stage, as much as fans and long-time fans of the sport admire what Mercedes are doing on a level of brilliance, and it's really the other team's fault who haven't been able to match them. It would be nice to see someone win, and I think this is the main purpose of these rules, of trying to get it in. But it is going to be fascinating to see, whether it closes it up or whether we just create a new dominant force within Formula 1. Maybe the newly formed Aston Martin. We never know in terms of that. But it will be fascinating, and I think there's probably a good point to round off what has been a brilliant chat, Jonty. I've really enjoyed this. It was a topic. Having listened to you, knowing that you have a fairly reasonable technical knowledge with the sport, I think it's a really fun topic to talk about because there has been so many over the years. There'll be people who comment down below probably who will come up with other ideas that they found were brilliant at the time, because that's what makes F1 brilliant. The engineering brilliance of making the best machines man can make within obviously a confinement of rules, and then obviously that whole team's work being culminated on qualifying and race days to one guy maximising the performance of this machine. And it's just brilliant to kind of talk about those innovations. So thank you for coming up, Jonty.
Yeah, it's been great fun. Thanks for having me on. And you're quite right, there's such a wide range of how you call innovations. I mean, we've kind of focused on the really interesting ones that have either caused controversy in some way or, been massively important and influential in a very public way. that everyone could see what's been going on, or the other side, they've been very, very sneaky. Like the mass damper, visually, no way you can tell anything is different with that car.
Mm.
But you can look at it in a much, much wider range. Disc brakes. That's an innovation. It wasn't specifically within F1, but they refined it and made it so much better. And when it did come into F1, that car destroyed everyone.
Mm.
It was miles ahead. Even things outside of the cars, like the use of flex, which took 13 years to happen. Which, I still don't understand that. That's an innovation within F1. And there's so many other things. And on the cars, you could go on for hours. The flappy paddle gear shift.
Yeah.
Detachable steering wheel. The wheel guns. There's a hell of a lot of engineering and innovation that goes on in just the wheel guns. And we even had controversy with those, because certain teams using nitrogen because it's less compressible and works the guns faster and things like that. I don't know if you remember. I can't remember when that was. I think that was mid-2000s.
And you had it with the fuel flow as well, didn't you? You had that, essentially one of the main reasons of why refueling was banned, because teams were finding a way of kind of flowing the fuel quicker into the car.
Yeah, do you watch Mark Priestley's videos?
Yes, I do, yeah.
He actually revealed one not so long ago I had never heard of from anyone. What they'd done, they'd rigged up a stethoscope in the fuel hose, right? Because the actual shut-off, the shut-off valve for the fuel activated a bit before, even like half a second or a second or so before you could actually remove the nozzle.
Wow.
But just holding the nozzle, you have no way to tell. So they rigged up a stethoscope, right, to the fuel hose with it was like a microphone stethoscope with the wire running inside the fuel guy's overalls up to earpieces, right? So while he's refueling the car, he can hear when the fuel shuts off, so he can get the hose. He can be prepared to get the hose off half a second quicker.
That's incredible.
I've never heard. That is crazy stuff. And without someone working within McLaren revealing that, no one would ever have known.
No, that is literally the stuff, and that is why F1 is brilliant, because you have these minds just coming up with, like you said. Now you say that, you go, well, that of course that's simple to have something like that, where you can actually hear the kind of the fuel stopping. So therefore you gain, like you said, that half a second, and half a second in a pit stop is massive. But, it is just amazing. Like I said, you don't think of those things. You wouldn't initially go, well, obviously now with no refueling, of course you wouldn't. But at the time, you wouldn't have necessarily thought of that. And it's brilliant. And it's been amazing. Like I said, we could go literally on talking for hours in terms of these innovations, but we will round it off.
Well, I'd like to leave you with one that's completely other end and comical. 1984 Tyrrell. At the time, a lot of teams were using water injection systems for, getting colder cylinders, increase the power.
Yeah.
Sometimes people would spray water into radiators, which would cool things. It's still used quite a lot on tuned Skylines and what have you. I'll have water sprays onto the intercooler. But obviously this needs a tank for the water. Tyrrell's idea of getting around the weight problems was that they would only use a little bit of water in this tank, and then between finishing the race and going to inspection, they would refill the tank.
Yes.
With a couple of gallons of water and 140 pounds of lead.
Oh, God. I'm correct. They got found out in this, didn't they?
Yes, they did. They got kicked out.
And then they got disqualified. Yeah, exactly. But
if you're going to do it, if you're going to cheat, at least cheat with class. Don't make it like a high school thing. It's utterly ridiculous. That's straight out of a cartoon.
That is not an innovation. That is just plain out and out cheating, and you got caught.
Yeah.
But Tyrrell were a team who were always pushing boundary.
Yeah.
They didn't have the budget, so they had the technical innovation to kind of go with it. And some were hits, and some were misses, and that is a massive miss. But again, Jonty, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a brilliant chat. I've really enjoyed it, and yeah, I hope you've had a good time and enjoyed it too.
Yeah, I've had a great time. I was talking about the technical side of things, and it's fun to dive into some of these ideas. So thanks for having me on. I'll see you later.
That's no problem at all. And I said, Jonty, obviously, follow him on Twitter. He is a regular appearer with Sean on the F1 word, but also he does have his channel, which I think you are planning to do a few more videos on recently. Is that the plan, Jonty?
Yes, I've been saying this to so many people recently. Yeah, it is all planned. I've just got to get stuck into it. The few I did were terrible, and may have had a couple of XWing clips in, so I don't want to use them. So they have to come down.
I know, but they will be there. So I'll leave a link in the description down below to Jonty's channel. But yes, and guys, if you're new around here, you can subscribe to the channel and click that bell notification. Keep up to date with all our latest content. Obviously, F1 Worldwide fan podcast coming out every Saturday in this Corona break, where we have like a guest on every week. So that's always fun to do. But we hope you've enjoyed this one. But for now, you F1 fans, keep racing.